enhance collaboration with our stakeholders, including the youth, private sector, experts, civil society organizations, volunteers, and local communities, which is ever more critical in our public discourse. By forging partnerships and collaboration, the government will harness the ideas, skills, and resources to diverse stakeholders to better deliver services and policies in transformative ways and address the existing gaps in financial, human, and technical resources. I wish again to reiterate that the youth are a significant demographic of our country, making up over 75% of the population with a potential for contributing towards economic development of the country. And in this regard, their voices must be central to how we plan, allocate, and utilize our resources. This has therefore necessitated a shift in public financial management towards inclusive and participatory governance, where citizens, including youth, actively engage and participate in policy formulation and act as co-creators of government policies and services. Ladies and gentlemen, Kenya has adopted privatization as a strategic economic policy shift to promote efficiency in the economy by subjecting more services to market forces, to improve competitiveness, revenue generation, aid in fiscal consolidation pathway by reducing government spending on inefficient state corporations and market development in deepening Kenya's capital market. So the objective of our privatization agenda is to ease the burden of governance of these institutions from the government to the private sector, who are better equipped for the market economy. The National Treasury will in this regard continue with sound macroeconomic policies to enhance resilience and create a conducive environment for the private sector to thrive, including the local business communities. This strategic response is anchored in our bottom-up economic transformation agenda and also on the fourth medium-term plan, MTP4. And these frameworks prioritize sectors with high youth employment potential, such as agriculture, micro, small, and medium enterprises, housing, healthcare, and of course, the digital and creative economy. And these sectors are not only engines of growth, but also platforms for innovation, entrepreneurship, and job creation for the youth. So over the recent past, the youth of this country have expressed themselves over important national issues, which include high cost of living, unemployment, and governance transparency. We still remember vividly 2024, more particularly, what would have turned out as a dark day in this country. That was the 25th of June, 2024. What the youth of this country were protesting about was the issue of high or rising cost of living. Number two, the youth were also complaining about unemployment. They are coming out of colleges with good certificates. Their parents have exchanged ng'ombe with papers, certificates. Papers which should help them better their lives. Papers that should help them get job opportunities. But alas, when they come out, there are no employment opportunities available. The other thing that the youth were complaining about was the issue of governance and transparency. The youth is telling us that they are not happy with the way we are using their resources, that we must change, that we must adopt transparency, that we must adopt accountability, that we must adopt prudent use of public resources. These concerns are valid. These concerns demand for immediate action. We cannot just sit and watch as students complain, as youth complain, and as they express themselves. And that is why the government must be committed to transforming the frustrations that our youth are going through into constructive dialogue and tangible action. We must dialogue with our youth. We must act on their demands. We must put to the best our ability to make sure that we transform these frustrations into productive engagement for the betterment and progress of our country. This forum, therefore, provides one of those perfect opportunities to provide our feedback on the necessary action from the government to address these challenges. So during this process, we will welcome positive critique of our public financial management systems and policies to shape the budget process. Your active engagement in this process will ensure efficient and transparent use of public funds, ensuring that resources are allocated to address youth empowerment and that the allocation achieves the intended objectives. So, ladies and gentlemen, during the launch of this process, I was elated and I was very happy to have received a written memorandum outlining some practical measures through which we can enhance financial support for students in tertiary institutions. And just to make you comfortable, just by engaging in at that initial stages, I wish to report that if you go and you Google, I know you said you don't have bundles, but you can combine your strengths and Google National Treasury website. If you go and check the National Treasury website, and you look at the BPS, Budget Policy Statement for 2026, which we will be tabling in Parliament in February, you will see that the allocation for Higher Education Loans Board is moving from what was provided in 2025, last year, or the year that is yet progressing, the current financial year. We provided 41 billion Kenya shillings for Higher Education Loans Board. That is proposed to increase by about 40%, from 41 billion to 58 billion. And the university scholarship, that part which is not loan, is also proposed to increase from about 16 billion this financial year to 34 billion in the next financial year. That therefore means that the two, if you add 16 billion to 41 billion, that is 57, and is likely to move from 57 to 92 billion, the two figures put together. That is a reaction to the concerns that we have got from the students. Directly, we are responding. And by the way, the budget for education is going to increase with not less than 50 billion shillings in the next financial year. But we are working on the figures and looking at our budget to see if we can even make more resources available for education, because a society that does not care and invest in education of their population is a society that is destined to collapse. That's not a society that would make progress. So we have noted the feedback, which includes strengthening financial support for student financing, as I've mentioned, reforming students' loan financing through fiscal policy, targeted student grant funding for vulnerable students, facilitate provision of affordable student accommodation, and I have taken note of the Eldoret National Polytechnic that requires more accommodation facilities, and establishing an emergency student support fund. This will be consolidated alongside the views from the other regions for consolidation during the preparation of the financial year 2026-27 and the medium-term budget process. Furthermore, we are aware of the financial strains facing our public institutions, which impact the quality of education and future prospects of our youth. Our strategy emphasizes increasing funding, infrastructure development, and curriculum reforms to equip students with skills relevant to the evolving job market, particularly in areas like artificial intelligence, data science, green technologies, and finally, vocational trades. So those are the areas that we are going to target. Artificial intelligence, because we are living in a global community which is moving very fast in terms of technology. We must keep pace. Data science is an area that we must invest in. Green technologies is another area of investment. And of course, the vocational trades. We must learn as a country to accept that vocational training is an integral part
of any societal development. If you go to those countries which pride themselves of having developed, you will realize that employment is not a problem because people don't choose jobs. Today in Kenya, I would tell you, those of us who have tried to get services of plumbers, electricians, and the rest, I will tell you, they are difficult to find today because of the affordable housing. I have a plumber who has been working for me for many years. When I wanted to get his engagement, he told me, Waziri, I'm sorry, I'm so busy, I have too much work. He used to be very idle. Today, that gentleman is not as idle as he used to be. I have to now plead with him to squeeze some time for me. That is the country that we should live in, where all trades have something, where all people with different expertise have something to do, have something to offer to the economy. And I will come back to that. Ladies and gentlemen, as you're aware, the government has been in the process of formulating 2026-27 financial year budget and also the medium term. We have, in this regard, prepared a draft 2026 budget policy statement containing the proposed policies and resource limitations for the period. That is the resource envelope. It's already on our website. This document has already been uploaded on the National Treasury website for public review and comments. I am looking forward to receiving valuable comments from you to inform its finalization before we submit it finally to Parliament by mid-February. I wish to urge for your concerted effort to enable us build a Kenya where opportunities are accessible to all, where youth are empowered to lead, and where our collective aspirations become reality. Together, we can forge a prosperous, inclusive, and resilient nation. On privatization, and I'm drawing to a close. I'm back in a very few papers. Then it has sema machache off the cuff. So, ladies and gentlemen, on privatization, I have this to say. Privatization is often part of a broader process of structural reform. Privatization transactions are complex and require careful consideration of a number of issues. Well-designed and implemented privatization policies are essential to ensure credibility of reforms, to help governments achieve their objectives, and to create efficient and competitive markets for goods and services. Privatization of state-owned enterprises ushers in the private sector to participate in commercial activities that government-owned enterprises are taking. This is necessary because the private sector carries out commercial activities more efficiently than public sector, especially in competitive industry. By the way, I hope you are aware that you as individuals and your private businesses are included when I make reference to the private sector. It's not some strange animal somewhere. If you can do some small business, you are also in the space of the private sector. The benefits of privatization include, but is not limited to, the following. 1, lower prices, better quality of goods and services produced, wider choices for consumers, more innovation, minimal red tape in decision making, and of course, less corruption. That is the value and virtues which the private sector bring into business. Less corruption. To safeguard these benefits of privatization, the government has a social obligation to maintain a fair business environment through appropriate regulations and policies. Already, Kenya has developed a fairly robust regulatory environment with the Competition Authority of Kenya overseeing all sectors of the economy, supported by sector-specific regulators such as Communications Authority of Kenya. So privatization as a key tool to address the following 3 main or major economic issues. That is, balancing of government debts, public expenditure
rationalization, and revenue raising, which we also call revenue mobilization. So we talk about revenue mobilization, we talk about expenditure limiting government debt, constraining budget deficits, that is reducing budget deficit. And that is one of the questions to make sure that we correct the messes of the past. To optimal levels, and hence can not be pushed further. Kenyans are saying they are choked. You target rich. After targeting, trade should never be taxed. So we should try as much as possible to reduce taxes on trade. Let people do business, make their money, and that is why you find our unemployment levels continue to rise. We need to look at that area very carefully. And I've tasked my team at the National Treasury to see how we can make trade more friendly in terms of tax policies. You will agree with me that unlike taxation, this is aggregate demand, which in the long run would widen the revenue base. So privatization does not reduce wealth. Instead, it enhances. As I wind up, I want to just mention interest rates, currency GDP growth. We must turn to innovative financing mechanism to fund our infrastructure and public service projects. As the financial needs of the government continue to outpace our available public resources, private sector participation has become a critical tool in addressing infrastructure gaps, enhancing service delivery, and promoting sustainable development. There are many success stories. I know one of us spoke about cases where privatization has failed. And indeed, it is true. There have been previous attempts to privatize some government institutions with disastrous outcomes, like Uchumi Supermarket. But probably one of the reasons why Uchumi failed and others which have failed is because of the timing. Privatization, if you don't time it perfectly, then you definitely fail. But those privatizations that have been timed have succeeded. And let me give you examples. The first one is with regards to Safaricom. Safaricom was started in 1997 as a small department in government, very tiny. It was making profit, yes, but it was not a profit worth talking about. The government, therefore, made a decision at one point to privatize Safaricom. We are not privatizing Safaricom today. Safaricom was privatized several years back when we allowed 40% of the share ownership to be released to Vodacom. So the government then of President Moi retained 60%. 40% was sold out or divested and released to Vodacom through Vodafone Kenya, which is a subsidiary of Vodacom South Africa, which Vodacom South Africa is a subsidiary also of Vodafone UK. So the parent company is called Vodafone UK. Vodafone UK formed a subsidiary in South Africa called Vodacom. That subsidiary came and invested in Kenya and formed a subsidiary called Vodafone Kenya. So it is Vodafone Kenya which owns 40% today of Safaricom. 60% was still held by the government. Come 2008, President Kibaki saw it fit that the government was still too heavy in Safaricom. And decided to release